This is my son's house, and I want you out by the end of the month." Dorothy Crane stood in my living room like she owned the place. Her designer purse hung from her arm. Her perfectly styled gray hair didn't move an inch as she pointed toward the front door. Behind her, my husband Kevin sat on the couch, staring at his phone, pretending this wasn't happening. I had just come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. My feet ached. My scrubs still smelled like antiseptic. And here was my mother-in-law, delivering her weekly dose of hatred. "Did you hear me?" Dorothy snapped. "I said get out. Kevin has finally come to his senses. He's filing for divorce, and you're not getting a penny of what belongs to this family." I looked at Kevin, my husband of 7 years, the man who had promised to love and protect me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Kevin," I asked quietly, "is this true?" He shrugged without looking up. "Mom's right. This isn't working anymore. You're never home. You care more about your job than our marriage." Dorothy smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally won a war she'd been fighting since the day I married her son. What she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. "My name is Adrienne Porter. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital. For 7 years, I believed I had married into a loving family. I was wrong." The problems started small. Dorothy would make comments about my cooking, my clothes, my modest family background. Kevin came from old money. His grandfather had built a successful construction company. Dorothy never let me forget that I was a scholarship kid who had worked 2 jobs to get through nursing school. "She's just protective," Kevin would say whenever I complained. "Give her time." I gave her 7 years. It was never enough. 3 months into our marriage, Dorothy convinced Kevin that I shouldn't be on the deed to our house. "Protect the family assets," she whispered. Kevin agreed without even discussing it with me. I found out when I saw the paperwork on his desk. That hurt, but I loved Kevin and I believed he loved me, so I stayed quiet. I worked hard. I contributed to the mortgage every month. I paid for renovations, furniture, and repairs. I have every receipt. What Dorothy and Kevin didn't know was that my grandmother had left me something far more valuable than money. She left me knowledge. Grandma Rose was a real estate attorney for 40 years. She taught me everything about property law before she passed. 6 months ago, I started noticing strange charges on our joint credit card. Expensive dinners I hadn't attended. Hotel rooms in our own city. Jewelry I never received. I'm not stupid. I knew what those charges meant. Instead of confronting Kevin, I started documenting. Every receipt, every late night, every lie he told about working overtime when his office was dark. Then I found the texts on his phone. Her name was Brianna. She was 25, a receptionist at his real estate firm. The messages were graphic, detailed, and devastating. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did what Grandma Rose taught me to do. I built a case. I quietly opened my own bank account at a different bank. I moved my personal savings, money I had earned and saved before our marriage, to that account. I made copies of every financial document in our house. Most importantly, I started researching the house that Dorothy called my son's house, the house she was now demanding I leave. What I discovered changed everything. Kevin's grandfather, Harold Crane, had built a construction empire in the 1960s. When he died, he left everything to his children, including the land our house sat on. But Harold was a smart man. He knew his family. He knew their weaknesses, so he created a trust with very specific conditions. The original house on this property burned down 15 years ago, before I ever met Kevin. The insurance paid out, but it wasn't enough to rebuild. That's when Kevin's father made a decision that would come back to haunt his son. He took out a construction loan, a big one, and when he couldn't pay it back, the bank foreclosed. The Crane family lost the property. But here's where it gets interesting. The property went to auction, and it was purchased by a small investment company called Rosewood Holdings, LLC. Rosewood Holdings was my grandmother's company. Grandma Rose never told me she bought the property. I only discovered it when I was going through her estate documents 6 months ago. She had passed away 2 years earlier, and I was finally organizing her files. The property had been transferred to me. I owned the land this house sat on. I know what you're thinking. How did Kevin build a house on land he didn't own? Simple, he didn't know. When Grandma Rose bought the property, she leased it back to the Crane family through a property management company. The lease was for 20 years, with monthly payments that looked like property taxes on the statements. Kevin's father never told him the truth. He was too ashamed. He let Kevin believe the family still owned the land. When Kevin built our house 5 years ago, he built it on leased property. Property that I now owned. The 20-year lease had expired 3 years ago. Grandma Rose never renewed it because she was already suffering from dementia by then. But she had left detailed instructions in her will about the property. "Give it to Adrian," the letter said. "She'll know what to do with it when the time comes." I think Grandma Rose knew something about the Cranes that I didn't. Or maybe she just knew that everyone needs an insurance policy. Either way, I had one now. After Dorothy's announcement, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply nodded. "I understand," I said calmly. "I'll need that request in writing, of course, for legal purposes." Dorothy laughed. "Legal purposes? Honey, you have no legal standing here. This is Kevin's house. Built with Crane family money. You're just a guest who overstayed her welcome." "Still," I replied, "I'd like it in writing, just to keep things clear." Kevin finally looked up from his phone. "Just do what she says, Adrian. Mom's lawyer will send you something official tomorrow." "Perfect," I said. "I'll be waiting." I walked upstairs to our bedroom, what used to be our bedroom, and closed the door. Then I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. "It's happening," I said when she answered. "They're making their move." "Are you ready?" Claudia asked. She had been Grandma Rose's protege, trained in the same real estate law firm. "I've been ready for 6 months." "Then let's begin. I'll file the ownership paperwork tomorrow morning. And Adrian, I'm going to enjoy this." So was I. The next few days were surreal. Dorothy moved into our guest room to help Kevin through this difficult time. In reality, she was marking her territory. She rearranged my kitchen. She threw away my grandmother's dishes, calling them tacky. She invited her friends over for lunch, showing off the house like it was already hers. Kevin avoided me completely. He stayed late at work, came home after I was in bed, and left before I woke up. The few times we crossed paths, he looked through me like I was a ghost. I continued going to work. I continued smiling at my patients. I continued being the professional, responsible person I had always been. But at night, when the house was quiet, I worked on my case. I organized every document, every bank statement showing my mortgage contributions, every receipt for renovations I had paid for, every piece of evidence of Kevin's affair. And most importantly, I prepared the property documents, the deed showing I own the land, the expired lease, the certified letter I was about to send. Dorothy wanted me out of her son's house. She was about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. 1 week after Dorothy's ultimatum, Kevin's lawyer sent me official divorce papers. They wanted everything. The house, the cars, the retirement accounts. They were claiming that I had contributed nothing to the marriage and deserved nothing in the divorce. There was also a restraining order request, claiming I had been emotionally abusive to Kevin and his mother. A complete fabrication, but effective. If granted, I would have to leave the house immediately. I read the papers 3 times, then I laughed. They had made a critical mistake. In their greed, they had overplayed their hand. The divorce papers listed the house as Kevin Crane's sole property, inherited from family assets. They claimed I had no ownership stake because my name wasn't on the deed. They were right about one thing. My name wasn't on the deed to the house. But the house was worthless without the land it sat on, and the land belonged to me. I called Claudia. They filed its time. "The ownership documents are ready," she said. "I'll file them today, And I'm also filing a motion to dismiss their restraining order request. They have no grounds. What about the eviction notice? Being prepared as we speak. They should receive it within the week. Dorothy threw a dinner party that weekend. She invited all of Kevin's family and friends to celebrate the new chapter in his life. I wasn't invited, of course. I was told to stay in my room. I listened from upstairs as Dorothy told everyone how she had finally freed her son from his gold-digging wife, how I had trapped Kevin into marriage, how I had contributed nothing while living off Crane family money. "She'll be out by the end of the month," Dorothy announced proudly. "And she won't get a dime. Our lawyers made sure of that." Everyone applauded. I sat on my bed, holding the eviction notice that would be delivered on Monday. It was addressed to Kevin Crane, current resident of the property owned by Adrian Porter. The notice gave him 90 days to vacate the premises. It also demanded 7 years of back rent for the expired lease, a sum that totaled over $200,000. I didn't want the money. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted Dorothy to understand that she had underestimated me from the very beginning. Monday couldn't come soon enough. The process server arrived at 9 a.m. on Monday. I was at work, but Claudia had arranged for everything to be documented. Dorothy answered the door in her silk robe, probably expecting a package. Instead, she received a thick envelope of legal documents. I got a text from Claudia an hour later. Delivered, her face was priceless. She actually tried to refuse it. I couldn't be there in person, but I could imagine the scene. Dorothy tearing open the envelope, reading the ownership documents, seeing my name on the deed to the land. Then reading the eviction notice, 90 days to vacate, $200,000 in back rent. My phone started blowing up around noon. First Kevin, then Dorothy, then numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. At 2 p.m., I received an email from Kevin's lawyer, demanding an immediate meeting to discuss this misunderstanding. I forwarded it to Claudia without responding. At 4 p.m., Dorothy showed up at the hospital, demanding to see me. Security escorted her out when she started screaming in the lobby. By the time I got home that evening, the house was empty. Kevin and Dorothy had left, but they had also changed the locks. I stood at my own front door, key useless in my hand, and smiled. Changing the locks was a mistake, a big one. I called Claudia. They locked me out. "Perfect," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "That's illegal lockout. In this state, that's a criminal offense. I'll add it to our filing. They just made our case 10 times stronger." I didn't try to force my way in. Instead, I drove to a hotel and checked in for the night. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and slept better than I had in months. The next morning, Claudia filed an emergency motion with the court. By noon, we had a court order demanding Kevin restore my access to the property immediately. The sheriff delivered the order personally. When I returned to the house that afternoon, Kevin was waiting on the porch. He looked terrible. His eyes were red. His clothes were wrinkled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. "Adrian," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to talk. This is all a big misunderstanding." "Is it?" I asked, walking past him. "I don't think so." Kevin followed me inside, talking fast. "I didn't know about the land," he said. "My father never told me. This isn't my fault. Mom gets carried away sometimes. She doesn't speak for me." I turned to face him. "Dorothy told me to leave. You sat there and said nothing. You said I care more about my job than our marriage. You let your mother throw away my grandmother's dishes. You filed divorce papers demanding everything and giving me nothing." That was the lawyer's idea. Mom's lawyer. I didn't even read them properly. "You didn't read your own divorce papers." He had no answer for that. "Kevin," I said quietly, "I have documented proof of your affair with Brianna. The dinners, the hotels, the jewelry. I have screenshots of your text messages. I have bank statements showing you spent over $40,000 on her in the past 6 months." His face went white. "I also have records of every dollar I contributed to this house, every mortgage payment. Every renovation, every repair. 7 years of contributions you and your mother claim don't exist. Adrian, please. We're done talking, Kevin. From now on, communicate through lawyers. Dorothy didn't give up easily. Over the next 2 weeks, she launched a campaign to destroy my reputation. She called my supervisors at the hospital, claiming I was mentally unstable. She posted lies on social media about me. She contacted my few remaining friends, warning them about my true nature. Most of it bounced off me. My supervisors knew my work ethic. My real friends knew my character. The social media posts were so obviously bitter that people saw through them. But one thing did hurt. Dorothy contacted my mother. My mom and I had a complicated relationship. She didn't approve of my marriage to Kevin, not because of him, but because she thought I was reaching above my station. She thought I should have married someone simpler, someone from our background. Dorothy fed into those insecurities. She told my mother I had lied and schemed my way into the Crane family, that I was now trying to steal their property through fraud. My mother called me, crying, "Adrian, what have you done?" I spent an hour explaining the truth, showing her the documents, telling her about Grandma Rose's gift. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandmother always knew you were special. I'm sorry I doubted you." The court date arrived faster than expected. Dorothy had hired an expensive legal team to fight the eviction. They filed motion after motion, trying to delay the inevitable. But Claudia was better. She had the documents. She had the timeline. She had the truth. The courtroom was small but packed. Dorothy sat with Kevin on one side, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits. I sat with Claudia on the other side. The judge reviewed all the paperwork, the original deed from Harold Crane, the foreclosure documents, the auction records, the transfer to Rosewood Holdings, the lease agreement, the expiration date, the inheritance documents nomming me as the new owner. "Let me understand this correctly," the judge said, looking at Dorothy's lawyers. "Your client built a house on property his family no longer owned, using a lease that expired 3 years ago and is now refusing to vacate or pay back rent." Dorothy's lead lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, there was clearly a misunderstanding about the property status." A misunderstanding that lasted 3 years. The judge continued reviewing documents for what felt like hours. Dorothy fidgeted in her seat. Kevin stared at the table. Their lawyers whispered frantically to each other. Finally, the judge looked up. "The ownership documents are clear and legally valid. The property belongs to Ms. Porter through legitimate inheritance. The lease expired 3 years ago, and no new agreement was established. The current residents have been occupying the property without legal permission." Dorothy jumped up. "This is fraud. She manipulated her way into this. She married my son just to steal from us." "Mrs. Crane," the judge said sharply, "sit down. Another outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Dorothy's lawyer pulled her back into her seat. "I'm ruling in favor of Ms. Porter," the judge continued. "The eviction notice stands. The occupants have 90 days to vacate. As for the back rent claim of $200,000. He paused, looking at the financial documents. "I'm reducing that to $150,000 based on fair market value for the area. This amount is due within 60 days. Failure to pay will result in additional legal action." Dorothy started crying. Kevin looked like he might be sick. I felt nothing but relief. After the hearing, Kevin caught up with me in the parking lot. "Adrian, wait, please." I stopped but didn't turn around. "I know I messed up," he said. "I know I let Mom control everything, but we can fix this. We can work something out." "Work what out, Kevin? You were going to throw me out of my own home with nothing. You were sleeping with your receptionist while I worked double shifts to pay our bills. You let your mother treat me like garbage for 7 years. I was weak, I know that now, but I love you." I finally turned to face him. "No, you don't. You love the idea of me, the nurse who worked hard and never complained, the wife who made you look good at family events, the woman who was grateful for whatever scraps you gave her." That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day, my dreams, my life outside of serving you and your mother? He couldn't answer. I didn't think so. Goodbye, Kevin. Word spread quickly through Kevin's social circle. The story was too good not to share. The gold-digging nurse who actually owned the land. The mother-in-law who demanded an eviction and got one herself. People I had never met reached out to congratulate me. Former colleagues of Grandma Rose who remembered her brilliance. Other nurses at the hospital who had dealt with similar family situations. Even strangers online who had heard the story through mutual connections. But the support I valued most came from unexpected sources. Kevin's sister, Nicole, called me 2 weeks after the hearing. We had never been close. She lived across the country and rarely visited. I owe you an apology, she said. I knew how Mom treated you. I saw it at family gatherings. I should have said something. Why didn't you? Because it was easier not to. Because I didn't want to be Mom's target. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Thank you for being honest. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this with more grace than anyone in our family deserves, including me. The 90 days passed slowly. Dorothy tried everything to delay or reverse the eviction. She filed appeals. She contacted local politicians. She even tried to buy the property from me at a fraction of its value. I rejected every offer. Why won't you just take the money? Kevin asked during one of his many attempts to negotiate. Name your price. Mom will pay it. It's not about money, Kevin. It never was. Then what do you want? I thought about it for a long moment. What did I want? I want your mother to admit she was wrong. Publicly. I want her to acknowledge that she spent 7 years trying to destroy my marriage and my self-worth. I want her to understand that I was never the enemy. Kevin shook his head. She'll never do that. I know. That's why we're here. On day 89, Kevin and Dorothy finally moved out. They took everything they could carry. The furniture, the appliances, even the light fixtures. The house was stripped bare. But it was still my house, on my land, and they were finally gone. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Thanks to Claudia's thorough documentation, I received a fair settlement. Half of Kevin's retirement accounts, half of the assets acquired during our marriage, and full ownership of the property, which was never in dispute. The $150,000 in back rent was applied as a credit against Kevin's settlement payment. In the end, he owed me an additional $75,000. Dorothy paid it. Of course she did. She had been paying for Kevin's mistakes his entire life. Why stop now? I heard through Nicole that Dorothy had to sell some of her investments to cover the costs. Her perfect retirement plan, disrupted by the woman she had dismissed as worthless. Kevin moved into Dorothy's house. At 36 years old, he was living with his mother again. Brianna, the receptionist, had dumped him weeks after the court hearing. Apparently, she wasn't interested in a man who was losing everything. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. But then I remembered his shrug, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way he sat there while his mother destroyed my life. My sympathy disappeared. With the house empty, I had a decision to make. I could sell the property and start fresh somewhere new. I could renovate and make it my own, or I could do something else entirely. I chose option 3. I hired a contractor, not from the Crane family company, and converted the house into a duplex. 2 separate living units, each with its own entrance. I moved into one unit. The other, I rented to a young nursing student struggling to afford housing while finishing her degree. Her name was Carla. She reminded me of myself at that age, working hard, dreaming big, refusing to let circumstances define her future. I don't understand why you're charging so little, she said when she saw the rent amount. This place is worth 3 times this. Because someone helped me once, I replied, and I believe in passing it forward. It was true. Grandma Rose had helped me through nursing school when my own family couldn't. She had believed in me when no one else did. Now it was my turn to believe in someone else. 1 year after Dorothy's ultimatum, I stood in my garden planting roses. The same type of roses that Grandma Rose had grown in her yard when I was a child. My life looked completely different now. I had been promoted to charge nurse at Mercy General. I had started volunteering at a legal clinic, helping other women understand their property rights. I had reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my marriage. And I was happy, genuinely happy for the first time in years. The doorbell rang. I wiped the dirt from my hands and walked to the front door. A delivery person stood there with a large envelope. Adrian Porter. That's me. I signed for the envelope and took it inside. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter was from Harold Crane's estate, specifically from a provision that had only recently been executed. Apparently, Harold had left instructions that if any family property was ever lost due to foolishness or greed, the responsible party would owe compensation to whoever rightfully owned it. The check was for $100,000. I stared at the check for a long time. Harold Crane, the grandfather-in-law I had never met, had somehow anticipated this moment decades before it happened. The letter included a personal note Harold had written, to be delivered to the property owner if this specific situation ever occurred. If you're reading this, someone in my family did something stupid. I apologize on their behalf. I tried to raise them better, but some lessons only life can teach. Use this money wisely and know that not all Cranes are fools. I laughed out loud. Harold sounded like someone Grandma Rose would have liked. Nicole called me that evening. I heard about grandfather's provision. Mom is furious. She had no idea that clause existed. Neither did I. He was a smart man, my grandfather. He knew his children's weaknesses. I think he would have liked you. I think I would have liked him too. The money went into a fund for nursing students at my alma mater, the Rosewood Porter Scholarship, named for my grandmother and myself. Every year, it would help someone like Carla pursue their dreams. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Kevin at a coffee shop. He was alone, looking older than his years. The confident man I had married was gone, replaced by someone who seemed permanently defeated. "Adrian," he said, surprised, "you look good." "Thank you." We stood awkwardly for a moment. The barista called my name. I collected my coffee. "How have you been?" Kevin asked. "Happy," I replied honestly. "Busy, fulfilled." "That's good, that's really good." He paused. "I've been in therapy, working through some things, mostly about Mom and why I let her control so much of my life." "That sounds healthy." "It is. I'm learning a lot about myself, not all of it good." He looked at me directly for the first time. "I owe you an apology, a real one, not because I want anything from you, just because you deserve it." I waited. "I was a coward and a fool. I let my mother treat you terribly because it was easier than standing up to her. I blamed you for problems I created. I'm sorry." I considered his apology carefully. 2 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, they felt like a chapter ending rather than a new beginning. "Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you saying that." "Does it help, even a little?" "It does, but it doesn't change anything between us. You understand that, right?" He nodded slowly. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just needed you to know that I finally see what I did wrong." "Then I'm glad you're getting help." We said goodbye outside the coffee shop. No hug, no tears, just 2 people acknowledging the end of something that had once meant everything. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter. The anger I had carried for so long was finally fading. Not because Kevin apologized, but because I had built a life where his opinion no longer mattered. Dorothy, I heard, was still bitter, still telling anyone who would listen about the scheming nurse who stole her family's property, but fewer people listened now. Her version of events had too many holes. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually. 3 years after Dorothy stood in my living room demanding I leave, I sat in that same room hosting a dinner party. Carla had graduated nursing school and started her career. Nicole had become a genuine friend. Colleagues from the hospital, women from the legal clinic, neighbors who had become family by choice rather than marriage, they all gathered around my table. Someone asked me to share my story. They had heard bits and pieces, but wanted the full version. So I told them about Grandma Rose and her wisdom, about Dorothy and her cruelty, about Kevin and his weakness, about the day I learned I held more power than anyone realized. "What's the lesson?" Carla asked when I finished. I thought about everything I had been through, the years of insults, the betrayal, the moment of triumph, the long process of healing. "Know your worth," I said finally. "Document everything, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve a seat at the table you helped build." The women around my table raised their glasses. "To knowing our worth," Nicole said. "To knowing our worth," we echoed. Outside, Grandma Rose's roses were blooming. Inside, I was surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I am. Dorothy had demanded I leave her son's house. Instead, she left mine.